My daughter-in-law whispered, "Your casserole tastes like dog food, just like you look." I didn't say a word, but her husband got an interesting email that night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how it all started, because the worst betrayals don't announce themselves with thunder. They slip in through your front door wearing a smile and holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers. My name is Vivian Roth. I'm 58 years old. I've been a widow for 5 years, a mother for 34, and a paralegal for 15 of those years, back when I still believed the legal system cared about truth more than billable hours. I raised my son Grant alone after my husband died of a heart attack in our driveway. I taught Grant how to balance a checkbook, change a tire, and cook a decent meal. I taught him that family was everything. I should have taught him that not everyone who joins your family deserves to be there. The wedding was in May. Spring wedding, outdoor venue, white roses everywhere. The kind of Pinterest-perfect event that costs more than my first car. Grant was 32, Sloan was 29, and I was just grateful my son had found someone who made him smile like that. The way he looked at her during the vows, God, it nearly broke my heart in the best way. I remember standing there in my mother-of-the-groom dress, watching this beautiful woman promise to love my boy forever, and thinking, finally, he won't be alone anymore. Sloan had been charming from the moment Grant introduced us 8 months before the wedding. She brought me artisan tea from some boutique downtown. She complimented my house. "It's so cozy, Vivian, so authentically lived in," though I caught the way her eyes lingered on the dated wallpaper and worn carpet. She asked thoughtful questions about my late husband, about Grant's childhood, about our family traditions. She was perfect. Almost. At the reception, I gave Sloan my grandmother's pearl earrings. They'd been passed down through 3 generations. My grandmother wore them on her wedding day in 1948, my mother wore them in 1965, I wore them in 1989. They weren't expensive by modern standards, but they were ours. Legacy in jewelry form. "Vivian, I can't accept these," Sloan said, her hand flying to her chest in that practiced gesture of humble surprise. "You're family now," I told her, fastening them myself because her hands were shaking. Or so I thought at the time. This is what we do, we pass things down. She hugged me. She even cried a little. Grant watched us with this expression of pure contentment, like he'd finally assembled all the pieces of his life into something whole. But here's the thing about being a mother. You develop a sixth sense. And even as I held Sloan and felt her tears dampen my shoulder, some primitive part of my brain whispered, "Her smile doesn't reach her eyes." I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid, overprotective, one of those cliché mother-in-laws who can't let go. Grant was happy. That's what mattered. The red flags started small. 2 weeks after the honeymoon, Sloan asked me about my retirement savings over coffee. Casual, conversational. "Vivian, have you thought about your financial future? Grant worries about you being alone in this big house." A month later, she wanted to know about the house equity. Just curious what properties are worth in this neighborhood. You know, for investment purposes. Then it was Grant's inheritance. Has Grant ever mentioned what'll happen with, family assets down the line? I just want to make sure we're prepared. Each question alone seemed innocent. Together they formed a pattern. But I swallowed my suspicions. I smiled. I poured more coffee. The Sunday dinners became our tradition. Every week, Grant and Sloan would come over, and I'd cook my famous chicken casserole, the recipe my own mother taught me, handwritten on an index card yellowed with age and splattered with decades of sauce stains. It was my love language, that casserole. Every herb measured by instinct, every stir a meditation. "This is incredible, Vivian," Sloan would say, fork poised over her plate. "You're such an amazing cook." Grant would beam. I would feel for a moment like we were a real family. But I watched her face when she thought no one was looking. The micro-expression of disgust as she brought the fork to her mouth. The way she pushed food around her plate to create the illusion of eating. The tight smile that never softened. My recipe cards sat in their wooden box on the kitchen counter. 3 generations of women, our handwriting, overlapping on grease-stained paper. My grandmother's sprawling cursive, my mother's precise print, my own cramped scrawl, added in margins and on the backs of cards. Sloane glanced at them once. "Quaint," she said. "Not charming, not special, quaint, like they were garage sale finds, like I was." 6 months into the marriage, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't articulate it, couldn't point to any single moment of obvious cruelty. But mothers know. We know the way you know when your child is lying, when they're hurt, when danger is circling. Something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. I also didn't know that I was about to find out in the cruelest way possible. But that comes later. First, you need to understand what I was fighting for, not just my dignity, not just my son's future. I was fighting for every woman who's ever been dismissed as irrelevant by someone younger, prettier, and meaner, every mother who's ever been tolerated instead of respected, every grandmother whose legacy was treated like trash. I welcomed a stranger into my family with open arms. She would teach me that some people see kindness as weakness. She would also teach me exactly how strong I really am. Cruelty doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It starts with small erasures. Your voice dismissed, your presence tolerated, your existence reduced to an inconvenience someone has to schedule around. 6 months into their marriage, the Sunday dinners continued. But something had shifted in the air, like the pressure change before a storm. Sloane started arriving late. Not egregiously late, just 15-20 minutes. Enough to make me wonder if I should hold dinner or start without them. Enough to make me feel like I was waiting on her pleasure. She'd walk through my door with that practiced apologetic smile, already pulling out her phone before her coat was even off. Throughout dinner, I'd watch her thumb scroll endlessly. Instagram, texts, emails. Whatever digital world was more compelling than the physical one where her husband and mother-in-law sat trying to make conversation. When I spoke, she'd sigh. Not dramatically. Just this soft exhale through her nose, like I was a child asking why the sky was blue for the 14th time. Her eyes would glaze over, her attention drifting somewhere past my left shoulder while I talked about my week, my garden, anything I thought might interest her. Grant noticed. Of course he did. But Grant saw what he needed to see. "She's stressed with work," he'd say, squeezing Sloane's hand across the table. "Big project deadline coming up, right, babe?" "So stressful," Sloane would confirm, leaning into him with a delicate exhaustion that made me want to laugh. Or scream. I hadn't decided which yet. "She's still adjusting to family life," Grant told me privately one evening as he helped me wash dishes. "It's a big change, Mom. Give her time." I wanted to tell him that time wasn't going to fix what I was seeing. But mothers have to be careful. Push too hard, and you become the villain in your own son's story, the overbearing mother who can't accept his wife, who manufactures problems because she can't let go. So I smiled. I dried the dishes. I kept my mouth shut. But I kept my eyes open. 2 weeks later, I was in my bedroom putting away laundry when I heard Sloane on her phone in the hallway. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and her voice carried, low and amused, dripping with the kind of casual contempt you only use when you think no one important is listening. I know, right? Every single Sunday. Like I don't have better things to do than eat overcooked chicken and listen to stories about people I've never met. Pause, mocking laughter. "Oh, she lives for this stuff. It's honestly kind of sad. Grant feels guilty if we skip, so..." Another pause. "Yeah, exactly. The things we do for family money, right?" I stood frozen in my bedroom, a folded towel pressed against my chest like a shield. Family money. The words echoed in my head, rearranging themselves into patterns I didn't want to see. When Bridget came over the following Sunday, I was almost relieved. Bridget had been my best friend since Grant was in elementary school. She'd helped me survive widowhood, retirement, and every crisis in between. She was a retired school teacher with the superpower of seeing through bullshit at 50 paces. I needed her to tell me I was crazy. I needed her to see what I was seeing and confirm I wasn't manufacturing drama out of thin air. She saw it immediately. Sloane arrived 23 minutes late, blamed traffic that didn't exist, and spent the first 15 minutes of dinner on her phone. When Bridget asked her about work, Sloane's response was a masterclass in condescension. "It's pretty technical," she said with a patronizing smile. "Probably not that interesting to, non-industry people." Bridget taught advanced placement physics for 30 years, but apparently that didn't qualify her as capable of understanding Sloane's marketing job. The recipe box incident happened as I was bringing out dessert. My wooden recipe box sat on the kitchen counter where it had lived for 20 years, a sacred artifact, a connection to the women who'd raised me. Sloane reached past it carelessly to grab her wine glass and her elbow caught the edge. The box tumbled, spilling 3 generations of recipe cards across my kitchen floor. My grandmother's pot roast, my mother's apple pie. My own attempts at innovation, scrawled in the margins of inherited wisdom. Sloane glanced down, didn't bend to help, didn't apologize. "Oops," she said flatly, and walked back to the dining room, wine glass in hand. I knelt on my kitchen floor, gathering cards with trembling hands while Bridget crouched beside me, fury radiating from her in waves. "Vivian," she whispered. "Tell me you see what I'm seeing." I did. God help me, I did. Grant remained oblivious, laughing at Sloane's jokes in the next room, probably holding her hand under the table the way he always did. My son, who I'd raised to be kind and observant, somehow couldn't see the woman he'd married. Or maybe he could see her. Maybe he just loved her anyway. That thought hurt worse than anything. I started keeping a mental log that night. Dates, comments, behavioral patterns. My paralegal training kicked in like muscle memory. Document everything, trust your observations, build your case. The following week, Sloane asked about my retirement fund again. This time her phrasing was different, sharper. "Vivian, Grant and I have been talking, and we're really concerned about your financial future. Have you thought about liquidating some assets? The housing market is strong right now. You could sell this place, move somewhere smaller, give yourself a cushion." Give myself a cushion, or give them access to my equity, out of concern for my future, I repeated slowly, watching her face. "Exactly," Sloane said, her smile bright and empty as a showroom. "We're family. We want to make sure you're taken care of." That night, sitting alone in my kitchen surrounded by those rescued recipe cards, I finally let myself think the thing I'd been avoiding for months. She didn't marry my son. She married his bank account. She married his inheritance. She married his future earning potential and his aging mother's eventual death. And I was the only one who could see it. The question was, what the hell was I going to do about it? I spent all day Sunday preparing that casserole. I know how that sounds. Pathetic maybe that I'd invest hours into a meal for someone who couldn't stand me. But it wasn't about her. It was never about her. That casserole was my grandmother's recipe perfected over decades, each ingredient measured not by cups and teaspoons, but by instinct and love. When I cooked it, I was connected to something larger than myself, a chain of women who'd fed their families through the Depression, through wars, through losses that would have broken lesser people. I wasn't cooking for Sloane. I was cooking for my son, for my grandmother's memory, for the stubborn, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong about her. They arrived at 6:15. Grant was laughing about something as they walked through the door, his arm around Sloane's waist, and for just a moment I let myself believe everything was fine. That I'd imagined the cruelty, manufactured the tension, invented problems where none existed. Then I saw the earrings. My grandmother's pearl earrings, gleaming against Sloane's pale skin like tiny moons. She'd worn them deliberately. I knew she had. Not because she loved them, not because they meant something to her, but because they were a reminder, a territorial marker, a silent message. Everything that was yours is now mine. She caught me staring and smiled, touched one pearl with a manicured fingertip. "I thought Grandma Roth would want to be here for Sunday dinner," she said sweetly. "Even if it's just in spirit." Grant thought it was touching. I could see it in his face, this tender moment of his wife honoring family legacy. He had no idea he was watching a performance, a calculated manipulation designed to twist the knife while appearing reverent. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and gestured them toward the dining room. Dinner proceeded normally. The casserole came out perfectly, golden crust, herbs fragrant, chicken tender enough to cut with a fork. Grant took his first bite and made that sound he'd made since childhood, that little hum of satisfaction that told me I'd gotten it right. "Mom, this is incredible," he said. exactly as he always did. How do you make it taste this good every time? Practice, I said. And for a moment, just one perfect crystalline moment, I felt at peace. My son was happy, my table was full, the casserole was perfect. Maybe I could survive this. Maybe I could learn to coexist with a daughter-in-law who didn't love me, who saw me as an obstacle rather than family. People managed worse, didn't they? Then Sloane stood, plate in hand, smile in place. "Let me help you clear, Vivian," she said. "It's the least I can do after you worked so hard." I should have known. I should have heard the undertone, seen the glint in her eye. But I was tired of suspicion, exhausted from months of vigilance. So I stood and followed her into the kitchen with my own stack of dishes, grateful for what I thought was a gesture of kindness. The kitchen was quiet. Through the doorway, I could hear Grant's voice as he scrolled through something on his phone, probably sports scores. Normal domestic sounds, safe sounds. Sloane set her plate on the counter and turned to me. She moved closer than necessary, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, close enough to see the coldness in her eyes that her smile never quite reached. She leaned in, her lips almost touching my ear, and whispered, "Your casserole tastes like dog food, just like you look." The words were soft, intimate, delivered with the same tenderness someone might use to share a secret or express affection. Then she pulled back, her smile widening into something sharp and triumphant, and walked back to the dining room. Just like that. 8 words, and my world tilted sideways. I stood frozen in my kitchen, dish towel in my hands, breath caught somewhere between my lungs and throat. Shock hit first, the sheer audacity of it, the calculated cruelty, then humiliation, hot and acidic, crawling up my spine and spreading across my face, and finally, rage, cold, clarifying, absolute rage. She thought I was too weak to fight back. She thought I was too old, too irrelevant, too pathetically grateful for my son's presence in my life to defend myself. She'd whispered that poison in my ear and walked away confident I'd swallow it in silence. She was right about the silence. She was wrong about the weakness. I forced my hands to move, forced myself to load the dishwasher with steady movements. Through the doorway, I watched Sloane slide back into her chair, watched her touch Grant's arm and laugh at something he'd said. My son looked at her with such naked adoration it made my chest ache. He had no idea. He had no idea the woman he loved had just verbally eviscerated his mother in her own kitchen. I carried dessert to the table, apple pie, also my grandmother's recipe, and set it down with hands that didn't shake. Not yet, not where they could see. "Mom, you okay?" Grant asked, his brow furrowing. "You look pale." "Just tired, honey," I said, and the lie came easily. How many lies had I told to protect him over the years? One more wouldn't hurt. It's been a long day. Sloane ate her pie in delicate bites, her pearl earrings catching the light every time she moved. She'd won, and she knew it. She'd drawn blood without leaving a mark, inflicted a wound no one else would ever see, or so she thought. They left at 9:30, Grant kissing my cheek, Sloane offering another practice smile and a hollow thank you for dinner. I stood at my front door and waved as they drove away, the perfect image of the devoted mother seeing off her loving family. The moment their taillights disappeared, I closed the door, locked it, stood in the sudden silence of my empty house. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by my grandmother's recipe cards, my mother's handwritten notes, 3 generations of women who'd survived worse than a cruel daughter-in-law. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to rage. I wasn't going to call Grant and tell him what his wife had said, because he'd find a way to explain it away, to make it my misunderstanding or her bad joke. No. I was going to do what I'd been trained to do for 15 years as a paralegal. I was going to build a case, document, investigate, gather evidence, present facts so irrefutable that denial became impossible. She thought I was weak. She forgot. I raised a man alone after burying my husband at 53. Weak women don't survive that. Weak women don't put themselves through paralegal certification while working full-time and raising a teenager. Weak women break. I don't break. I plan. And that night, sitting in my kitchen with the taste of humiliation still bitter on my tongue, I began to plan exactly how Sloane Callahan was going to learn what happens when you mistake silence for surrender. People think mothers are soft. They forget. We're investigators by nature. We know when our children are lying before they open their mouths. We can hear a cough from 2 rooms away and diagnose whether it's allergies or the flu. We notice when a toy goes missing, when a friend stops calling, when something in their eyes dims just slightly. Mothers are pattern recognition machines wrapped in aprons and worry. Add 15 years as a paralegal to those instincts, and you get something dangerous. The Monday after that dinner, I woke at 5 a.m. with perfect clarity. The humiliation had burned away overnight, leaving something colder and more useful behind. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and did what I should have done the moment Grant introduced me to Sloane Callahan. I investigated her. My paralegal days had taught me that people leave trails. Employment records, credit histories, court filings, social media footprints. Everyone's life is documented somewhere if you know where to look, and I knew where to look. Sloane's Instagram was my first stop. The profile was public, carefully curated, aggressively wholesome. Photos of her and Grant at farmers markets, hiking trails, charity galas. Captions dripping with performative gratitude. #blessed, #family-first, #gratitude, #love my husband. Comments from friends gushing about how perfect they were together, how lucky Grant was, how Sloane was living her best life. Every photo was a lie. Or at least every photo was a version of truth so edited and filtered it bore no resemblance to the woman who'd whispered poison in my kitchen. I scrolled back. Months, then years. The photos with Grant started 18 months ago, tentative at first, then increasingly confident. Before Grant, there was a 6-month gap with almost no posts, odd for someone who clearly loved documenting her life. I dug deeper. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I found her professional profile, marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm, degree from State University, resume that looked impressive until you realized it was mostly lateral moves with no real advancement. Sloane had been treading water professionally for years, but it was the older profiles that made my pulse quicken. I found her under a slightly different name, Sloane Marie Callahan, instead of just Sloane Callahan. The privacy settings were looser, the photos more revealing. This was pre-Grant Sloane, before she'd learned to curate her image for a wealthier audience. Party photos, expensive restaurants, designer handbags she definitely couldn't afford on a marketing coordinator's salary, and captions, God, the captions, champagne taste on a champagne budget, with a photo of her in what looked like a luxury hotel. Why settle when you can have the best? Alongside a picture of her at some exclusive club. This was a woman who knew what she wanted and had no shame about how she got it. At 2 a.m., I called Bridget. Vivian? Her voice was thick with sleep and concern. What's wrong? I need your help, I said, my voice steady despite the coffee tremors in my hands. I need to know who she really is. Bridget was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then, I'll make calls in the morning. She did. Bridget had taught for 30 years, which meant she had connections across 3 decades of former students, many of whom had gone on to various careers in various cities. Sloane had attended State University. Someone in Bridget's network would have overlapped with her. By Wednesday, Bridget called back with a name, Rebecca Torres, who'd been in Sloane's sorority and now worked as a physical therapist in Denver. Rebecca remembers her, Bridget said carefully. And Vivian? She wasn't surprised when I said Sloane had married someone with money. Rebecca described a pattern. Sloane dated exclusively within the wealthiest fraternity on campus. When those relationships ended, always at her initiation, she'd already lined up someone with better prospects. She'd been known for calculating social climbing, for dropping friends when they couldn't advance her status, for keeping meticulous track of who had what and what she could gain from them. She wasn't mean, Rebecca had said. She was just transactional. Everything was currency, even people. I created a timeline, the way I'd once created case files, names, dates, relationships. I cross-referenced social media, found tagged photos, traced connections. A picture emerged, sharp and damning. Sloane's ex-boyfriends all had money. A grad student from a real estate family, a junior investment banker, a software engineer at a startup that later sold for millions. Each relationship lasted between 6 months and 2 years. Each ended when someone better appeared on the horizon. The breakthrough came from a photo dated 2 years before Grant. Sloane, at some rooftop bar, pressed close to a good-looking man in his late 20s. He'd tagged her, 2 years with this one. Here's to forever. His name was Trent Sullivan. I clicked through to his profile. Bartender, according to his bio. Local musician. Definitely not wealthy. The comments on that anniversary photo told a story, friends congratulating them, talking about how solid they were, how Trent had finally found the one. 3 weeks after that photo, Sloane's posts with him stopped, completely, no explanation, no breakup announcement, just silence. I scrolled through Trent's photos from that period. There was a picture of him looking exhausted, captioned simply, "Sometimes people surprise you, not in good ways." The comments underneath were revealing. "Dude, you dodged a bullet. She wasn't worth it, man. You'll find someone who actually values you. Can't believe she dumped you via text. Ice cold. And the most damning, she upgraded, bro. That's all it ever was to her. You were the practice round." I sat back in my chair, my kitchen suddenly too quiet. 3 weeks after that anniversary photo with Trent, Sloane had attended a charity gala. I knew because I'd seen the picture on her old Facebook, Sloane in a designer dress she couldn't afford, champagne glass in hand, standing next to a handsome man in an expensive suit. Grant, my son. At the architectural firm's annual fundraiser, she'd met Grant, assessed his value, and discarded Trent like a dress that had gone out of style. My hands shook as I added Trent Sullivan's name to my timeline. I had dates now, patterns. Proof that this wasn't personal, that I wasn't imagining things. Sloane didn't target me because I'd done something wrong. She targeted me because I was an obstacle to money she believed she'd earned by marrying my son. The recipe cards sat in their wooden box on my kitchen table, but I barely saw them anymore. In my mind, they'd transformed into something else. Evidence files, documentation, the building blocks of a case I was constructing, with the same care my grandmother had once used to perfect her casserole recipe. People think kitchens are domestic spaces, places of nurture and warmth. They forget. Kitchens are also where we wield knives, where we apply heat and pressure, where we transform raw ingredients into something entirely different. I'd spent weeks being hurt. Now I was going to spend my energy being strategic. I found her past, a trail of used and discarded men, a pattern of calculated social climbing, a woman who saw relationships as transactions and people as assets to be liquidated when something better came along. Now I needed her truth, the current truth, the things she was hiding from Grant right now, and I had a feeling Trent Sullivan was going to help me find it. Finding Trent Sullivan took less than an hour. Social media had made him easy to track. He still lived in the city, still worked at the same downtown pub where he'd been bartending when Sloane discarded him. The Copper Tap, a place that tried too hard to be upscale but couldn't quite hide its dive bar roots. I could picture Sloane there in her early days with Trent, pretending to enjoy craft beer while mentally calculating how to trade up. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon when the bar was mostly empty. Trent was behind the counter, wiping down glasses with the efficient movements of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. 29 years old, according to his Facebook profile. Handsome in an accessible way, the kind of face you'd trust, the kind of person you'd want as a friend, the kind of person Sloane would use and throw away without a second thought. I'd practiced my approach. Direct honesty would make me sound unhinged, the bitter mother-in-law with an axe to grind, so I'd constructed a lie the way a bartender might mix a cocktail. Just enough truth to make it believable, enough fiction to protect my real intentions. "Excuse me," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. "Are you Trent Sullivan?" He looked up, wary but polite. "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Vivian. I'm a writer working on a piece about modern relationships, specifically about how dating apps and social climbing have changed courtship patterns." The lie came smoothly. I'd been a paralegal, I knew how to present fiction as fact. "I was given your name by a mutual acquaintance who said you might have an interesting perspective." The wariness in his eyes shifted to something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the flicker of recognition that comes when someone touches on a wound you thought had healed. "What mutual acquaintance?" he asked. "Someone who knew both you and Sloane Callahan." His expression changed instantly. The polite bartender mask cracked, revealing something harder underneath. He set down the glass he'd been holding with deliberate care. "Oh, her," he said. "Yeah, I remember." I'd expected defensiveness, maybe reluctance. What I got was bitter, clarifying honesty. "Can I buy you a coffee?" I asked. "Off the clock? I promise this won't take long, and I think you might want to hear what I have to say." 20 minutes later, we sat in a corner booth of a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Trent had a black coffee he wasn't drinking. I had mine gripped between my hands like an anchor. "I'm not really a writer," I admitted. "I'm Sloane's mother-in-law." I watched his face carefully, waiting for anger or suspicion. Instead, he laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. "She got married," he said. It wasn't a question. "Let me guess. Someone with money?" "My son. He's an architect. Successful firm, good income, family money." Trent nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd always known. "Of course she did. That's what she does." The story came out in pieces, each one sharper than the last. 3-year relationship. Trent had thought they were building something real, had talked about marriage, about the future, about the life they'd create together. Sloane had seemed invested, seemed happy. She'd met his friends, integrated into his life, played the role of devoted girlfriend with the same skill she'd later use on Grant. Then she went to a charity gala with some co-workers, networking she'd called it. 3 days later, Trent got a text message. "Not even a call," he said, his voice flat with remembered shock. 3 years together, and she ended it with a text. "Do you still have it?" I asked, my paralegal instincts kicking in. Documentation, evidence. He pulled out his phone, scrolled back through what must have been years of messages, and handed it to me. The text was brutal in its efficiency. "Trent, this isn't working anymore. I need someone more aligned with my goals. I've met someone who can provide the kind of future I deserve. Please don't contact me again. Good luck with your music." "The kind of future she deserves," I repeated quietly. "Not the kind of future you'd build together. The kind she deserves." "She met your son that night," Trent said. "At the gala. I figured it out later when I saw their photos on Instagram. Same venue, same date. She literally met him, assessed his net worth, and came home to dump me via text message." But the text was just the beginning. Trent showed me more, screenshots he'd kept, not out of heartbreak but out of a kind of grim preservation instinct. When he'd tried to call her, to at least get an explanation, Sloane had sent him to voicemail, multiple voicemails, all saved, all devastating. He played one for me. Sloane's voice, dripping with contempt. "Trent, seriously? You're being pathetic. We had fun, but let's be honest. You're a bartender with a guitar and a bunch of loser friends. I'm 27 years old. I'm not wasting my prime on someone who's never going to amount to anything. I found someone who can actually provide for me. Move on." "Another. Stop calling. I mean it. You should be thanking me. I gave you 3 years you didn't deserve. Consider it charity." I felt sick listening to them. This was the woman my son had married. This was the woman who'd whispered cruelty in my kitchen and smiled at my dining room table. "Why did you keep these?" I asked. Trent's jaw tightened. "Because part of me knew she'd do this to someone else eventually, and I wanted proof. I wanted evidence that I wasn't crazy, that she really was that cruel." He looked at me directly. "I'm not heartbroken anymore, haven't been for a while, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't want her exposed. She's poison, and she's probably doing to your son what she did to me, making him think he's special while she plans her next upgrade." "She is," I said quietly, "and he has no idea." Trent leaned forward. "What do you need from me?" "Everything you have, texts, voicemails, photos, timeline, and if it comes to it, would you be willing to provide testimony? To tell my son the truth about who he married?" "Hell yes," Trent said without hesitation. "Send me your email. I'll forward everything tonight." We exchanged information. As I stood to leave, Trent caught my arm. "Mrs. Roth, thank you for believing she's capable of this. When I tried to warn people after we broke up, they thought I was just a bitter ex. They said Sloane was sweet, and I was making it worse than it was." "I believe you," I said, "because I've seen exactly what you're describing. She just hid it better with my son." That night, my inbox filled with evidence, screenshots, audio files, a timeline Trent had constructed matching his relationship with Sloane's social climbing pattern. It was more than I'd hoped for. It was prosecutorial. I had my first witness, a credible source with documented proof that Sloane Callahan was exactly what I suspected, a woman who saw relationships as transactions and people as stepping stones. But witnesses plural mattered more than witness singular. One ex-boyfriend could be dismissed as bitter. Multiple sources created pattern. Pattern created irrefutable truth. Trent Sullivan had given me Sloane's past, the pattern, the cruelty, the mercenary approach to relationships. But past behavior, no matter how damning, could be explained away. People change, Grant would say. She was young, she was immature, she's different now. I needed someone who knew the present, someone who'd witnessed Sloane's behavior in Grant's world, around Grant's colleagues, in the professional sphere where she had every reason to maintain her mask. I needed someone Grant trusted implicitly, whose word he couldn't dismiss as bias or misunderstanding. I needed Cleo Marquez. Grant had co-founded his architectural firm with Cleo 6 years ago. They'd met in graduate school, bonded over a shared vision of sustainable urban design, and built something successful through mutual respect and complementary skills. Grant was the creative visionary, Cleo was the pragmatic strategist who turned his dreams into profitable reality. More importantly, Cleo was direct in a way that bordered on blunt. She had no patience for politics or pretense. If anyone had seen through Sloane's performance, it would be Cleo. I called her on Friday morning, my heart hammering against my ribs like it hadn't since I was a paralegal cold-calling witnesses. Cleo, it's Vivian Roth, Grant's mother. I know this is unusual, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to meet me for coffee. There's something I need to discuss with you about my son. There was a pause. Then, is Grant okay? Physically, yes. But I think he's in trouble, and I think you might have noticed things I need to understand. Another pause, longer this time. When Cleo spoke again, her voice was careful. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., send me the address. We met at a cafe in the business district, the kind of place where deals were negotiated over lattes and NDAs were drafted on napkins. Cleo arrived exactly on time, dressed in the sharp, efficient way of someone who'd learned that women in architecture had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. She was 42, whip-smart, and incapable of bullshit. She ordered black coffee, sat down across from me, and said without preamble, "This is about Sloane." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. Cleo nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she'd been thinking for a while. I've never said this out loud, but I don't trust her. Never have. The relief that washed through me was almost painful. "Tell me why." Cleo wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, her architect's fingers, calloused from model building, ink-stained from sketching, looking out of place against the delicate ceramic. I noticed things at firm events, the way she'd position herself near our wealthiest clients. Not near Grant, near the clients. She'd laugh at their jokes, touch their arms, play this game of charming availability that stopped just short of inappropriate. Grant never noticed? Grant sees the best in people. It's one of his greatest qualities and his biggest blind spot. Cleo's expression hardened. I also noticed how she treated our junior staff, the interns, the entry-level designers. She was dismissive when she thought no one important was watching, condescending, like they weren't worth her time because they couldn't do anything for her. I pulled out my notebook, an old habit from my paralegal days. "Can you give me specifics, dates if possible?" Cleo could. She rattled off 3 separate incidents with the precision of someone who'd been cataloging concerns for months. A holiday party where Sloane had spent 20 minutes monopolizing a developer worth 8 figures while Grant schmoozed potential residential clients. A summer barbecue where she'd ignored the associate architects entirely, literally turning her back mid-conversation when someone more important approached. A client dinner where she'd asked pointed, inappropriate questions about profit margins and revenue distribution. And then there were the questions about finances, Cleo said. She asked me, more than once, about the firm's structure, Grant's equity stake, how we distributed profits, whether we planned to bring in other partners. I thought maybe she was just interested in Grant's career, trying to understand his business, but the questions were too specific, too invasive. What did you tell her? Nothing substantial. I redirected every time. But Vivian... Cleo leaned forward, her voice dropping. There's something else. Something I've never told Grant because I convinced myself I'd misheard. My pulse quickened. What? Last year, at our annual gala, Sloane had a few glasses of wine. She was talking to another architect's wife, someone she'd just met. I was standing about 10 feet away, close enough to hear but apparently not close enough for them to notice me. The other woman asked how she and Grant met, the usual small talk, and Sloane laughed and said, and I swear this is verbatim, at a charity event. I knew within 5 minutes he was my retirement plan. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. The other woman laughed, Cleo continued. She thought it was a joke. I wanted to believe it was a joke. But the way Sloane said it, there was no warmth, no affection. Just this calculating satisfaction. I wrote it down, my handwriting shaking slightly. My retirement plan. Not my husband, not my partner, not the man I love, my retirement plan. I thought about telling Grant, Cleo said quietly. But what was I going to say? Your wife made a joke that sounded off. He would have thought I was jealous or overstepping, and maybe I was wrong, maybe it was just a joke in poor taste. You weren't wrong, I said. I pulled out my tablet, opened the folder I'd created. Can I show you something? I walked her through it. Trent Sullivan's testimony, the screenshots, the voicemails, the timeline of Sloane's relationships, each one more financially advantageous than the last. The social media evidence, the pattern that emerged when you assembled all the pieces, a woman who saw people as investments and relationships as portfolios. Cleo's face grew harder with each piece of evidence. When I finished, she sat back, her coffee forgotten and cold. Jesus Christ, she whispered. Grant has no idea, does he? None. What are you going to do? Tell him, I said simply. Show him everything. Give him the evidence and let him make his own decision. But I need witnesses he'll trust. Trent is one. You're another. I need people who'll confirm I'm not some paranoid mother inventing problems. Cleo didn't hesitate. I'm in. Grant deserves better than this, and you deserve respect, not whatever the hell she's been doing to you. I hadn't told her about the casserole comment, about the whispered cruelty in my own kitchen, but something in Cleo's expression told me she'd guessed there was more to the story than I'd shared. Grant's my friend, Cleo said. My business partner. I've spent 6 years building something with him. I'm not going to watch him be used by someone who sees him as a transaction. She paused. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner. You're saying something now, I told her. That's what matters. We exchanged information, email addresses, phone numbers, promises to coordinate. Cleo agreed to document everything she'd witnessed, to write it down with dates and details the way an architect documents blueprints. Evidence, corroboration, truth built brick by brick. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, certainty. Not just gut instinct anymore, not just a mother's protective paranoia. I had witnesses, I had proof. I had a case that even Grant, with all his willful optimism and desire to see the best in people, couldn't dismiss. The architecture metaphor wasn't lost on me. Grant built structures, homes, buildings, spaces where people lived their lives. I was building something too. A structure of evidence, a foundation of truth, a framework that would force him to see what had been hidden in plain sight. I had witnesses. I had proof. Now I needed the right moment, the perfect timing, the ideal circumstances to present everything in a way Grant couldn't ignore or explain away. They say truth is a weapon. I'd forged an arsenal. Now I just needed to decide exactly when and how to deploy it. Being a mother means sometimes you have to break your child's heart to protect their future. I spent 3 days crafting that email. 3 days of writing and deleting, of pacing my kitchen at 2 a.m., of second, guessing every word and third guessing my right to send it at all. 3 days of wondering if I was saving my son or destroying my relationship with him forever. The cursor blinked in the subject line. I must have typed and deleted a dozen versions. About Sloane sounded accusatory. We need to talk sounded ominous, "Please read this" sounded desperate. Finally, I settled on something that balanced urgency with respect. Things you need to know about your wife. Direct. Honest. Impossible to ignore. The body of the email took shape slowly, painfully, like constructing a building from the foundation up. I drew on every skill I'd learned as a paralegal: how to present evidence, how to build a case, how to let facts speak louder than emotions. But I was also his mother, and that meant threading love through every sentence even as I documented betrayal. I started with the introduction, calm, loving, establishing my credibility and my motivation. "Grant, I'm writing this because I love you more than anything in this world. What I'm about to share is not easy for me to say, and it won't be easy for you to read. I've spent weeks investigating, documenting, and verifying everything I'm about to tell you. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and investigate for yourself." Then came the evidence, presented chronologically like a timeline in a case file. I started with Sloane's pattern, the ex-boyfriends, each one wealthier than the last, each one discarded when better prospects appeared. I included screenshots of her old social media posts, the ones that revealed her materialistic values before she'd learned to curate her image. Captions about champagne taste and never settling and knowing your worth that read very differently when you understood they meant financial worth. I attached Trent Sullivan's testimony, his screenshots of her cruel breakup text, the voicemails where she'd mocked his salary and called him pathetic, the timeline showing she'd met Grant at that charity gala and dumped Trent 3 days later via text message after 3 years together. This isn't the story of a bitter ex-boyfriend. This is documentation of a pattern. Trent has agreed to speak with you directly if you want to verify any of this. Then Cleo's observations. The professional red flags, Sloane's behavior at firm events, her inappropriate questions about finances, her dismissive treatment of junior staff. And the quote that still made my stomach turn, "my retirement plan." I included Cleo's contact information, her written statement, her dates and details. Objective, professional, impossible to dismiss as maternal bias. Cleo is copied on this email. She can confirm everything she witnessed. She's been concerned for months, but didn't know how to bring it up without seeming like she was overstepping. The financial concerns came next. Sloane's questions about my savings, my house equity, Grant's inheritance. The searches on her computer. I'd learned about these from Grant himself, though he'd mentioned them casually, never connecting the dots. Browser history about estate planning, about elderly parents signing over property, about inheritance timelines. And then, buried in the middle of the email, not the lead, not the dramatic climax, but the emotional turning point, I included what had happened in my kitchen. 3 weeks ago, after Sunday dinner, Sloane followed me into the kitchen. She leaned close and whispered, "Your casserole tastes like dog food, just like you look." Then she smiled and walked back to the table. I said nothing. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd want to believe I'd misunderstood, that she was joking, that I was being oversensitive. But Grant, I didn't misunderstand, and it wasn't the first time she'd been cruel when no one else was watching. I kept my tone measured even writing about that moment, though my hands shook on the keyboard. This wasn't about my hurt feelings. This was about showing Grant who he'd married. Someone capable of targeted cruelty, someone who saw kindness as weakness. The conclusion was the hardest part to write. How do you tell your child their marriage is a lie? How do you destroy their happiness even if it's built on deception? I don't expect you to believe me immediately. I don't expect you to leave her based on my word alone. I expect you to investigate for yourself. Look at her browser history. Check her social media. Talk to Trent. Talk to Cleo. Ask Sloane direct questions and watch how she responds. I've given you evidence. Now I'm asking you to seek the truth. I love you, Grant. That's why I'm sending this. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I can't watch you be used by someone who sees you as a financial investment rather than a human being worthy of real love. Whatever you decide to do with this information, I'll support you. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. You deserve better. You deserve someone who loves you, not your bank account, not your inheritance, not your future earning potential, just you. I'm always here. They love Mom. I attached everything: screenshots, audio files, Cleo's written statement, the timeline I'd constructed, photos of Sloane's old Instagram posts, every piece of evidence organized and labeled like exhibits in a trial. I copied Cleo, as we'd agreed. Third-party validation. Someone Grant trusted professionally, someone who had no reason to lie. The email sat in my drafts folder for 6 hours while I paced, while I questioned, while I imagined every possible response. Grant calling me screaming, Grant blocking my number, Grant choosing Sloane over me, Grant never speaking to me again. But I also imagined him 5 years from now, financially ruined, emotionally destroyed, finally seeing the truth when it was too late. Imagined him asking why I'd never warned him. Imagined the regret I'd carry for the rest of my life if I stayed silent. At 11:47 p.m. on Thursday, I pressed send. The timing was deliberate. Late enough that Sloane would likely be asleep. Early enough that Grant might still be up, might check his email before bed. Thursday meant he'd have Friday to process, to investigate, to decide how to handle it without the pressure of an immediate weekend confrontation. The whoosh of the sent email sounded like a gunshot in my quiet kitchen. I closed my laptop, sat in the darkness with my grandmother's recipe cards spread across the table. 3 generations of women who'd survived their own kinds of betrayals, who'd found strength in the most unlikely places. The email was sent. The truth was delivered. The evidence was documented with the precision of a paralegal and the desperate love of a mother. Now I could only wait. Wait for my son to read it. Wait for him to investigate. Wait for his world to shatter the way mine had shattered in that kitchen when Sloane whispered poison disguised as intimacy. I pressed send, and then I waited for my son's world to shatter, or for mine to end, if he chose not to believe me. Either way, the silence was over. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. I didn't want to be right, but I had to be brave enough to be right anyway. 36 hours. That's how long Grant didn't call. 36 hours of checking my phone every 5 minutes, of jumping at every notification, of lying awake at night imagining worst-case scenarios. Had he blocked me? Was he showing the email to Sloane, letting her spin some explanation that would make me the villain? Was I about to lose my son to protect him? Friday crawled by like a wounded animal. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. I kept my phone on the kitchen table and stared at it like it might spontaneously combust. Bridget called twice. I didn't answer. What could I tell her? That I'd detonated a bomb in my son's marriage, and now I was waiting to see if I'd destroyed my relationship with him in the process? Saturday morning brought nothing. Saturday afternoon, silence. By Saturday evening, I'd convinced myself I'd made a catastrophic mistake, that Grant had chosen his wife over his mother, that the evidence I'd so carefully compiled had been dismissed as jealousy or manipulation, or the bitter interference of a woman who couldn't let go. Then, at 8:47 p.m. on Saturday night, headlights swept across my living room window. I knew the sound of Grant's car. I'd been listening for it since he was 16 years old, coming home from dates or friends' houses or late-night study sessions. A mother knows her child's footsteps, their knock, the particular way they turn a key in a lock. But Grant didn't knock. The doorbell rang once, sharp and urgent, and when I opened the door, I barely recognized my son. He looked destroyed. That's the only word for it. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, his hair uncombed, his clothes, the same ones he'd worn to work Friday morning, I'd later learn, wrinkled like he'd slept in them. Which he hadn't, because he hadn't slept at all. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on that single syllable. I pulled him inside. He stood in my entryway like he didn't know what to do with his body, like he'd forgotten how limbs worked. I guided him to the couch, the same couch where I'd rocked him through nightmares when he was 5, where we'd watched movies when he was 12, where he'd told me about his college acceptance when he was 18. "I got your email," he said unnecessarily. "I know. I've read it 11 times. I've fact-checked everything. I called Cleo at midnight on Friday. I called Trent Sullivan this morning." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I wanted you to be wrong. God, Mom, I wanted you to be so wrong." "I know," I said again, my heart breaking for him. "You're not wrong." The words came out flat, defeated. "You're not wrong about any of it." He told me what he'd found. After reading my email, Grant had done what I'd asked. He'd investigated for himself. He'd gone through Sloane's laptop while she was at a yoga class Friday morning. Found her browser history, which she'd apparently thought was deleted but wasn't. Found her credit card statements showing purchases she'd hidden from him. Found a separate bank account he'd never known existed. And he'd found something worse. Something I hadn't even suspected. "She has spreadsheets," Grant said, his voice hollow. "Financial planning spreadsheets with different scenarios. One of them is titled Estate Settlement Timeline." He looked at me with eyes that had aged a decade in 36 hours. "It maps out what would happen if you died, Mom, how long probate would take, how quickly the house could be sold, what the estimated market value would be." She had the whole thing planned out. The room tilted. I gripped the couch cushion. "There's more," Grant continued. "Her browser history from last month, how to convince elderly parent to sign over property, power of attorney for aging parents, estate planning for seniors, memory care facilities near me." His voice rose slightly. "You're 58 years old. You're not elderly. You don't need memory care." But she was researching like you were already incompetent. I felt sick. Not shocked. Some part of me had suspected Sloane's interest in my finances was predatory. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the clinical calculation of it, made my stomach churn. "The pearl earrings," Grant said. "Your grandmother's pearls. I found an appraisal receipt in her email. She had them appraised 3 months ago. They're worth about $8,000. There's a saved draft email to an estate jewelry buyer asking about their purchase process. 3 generations of women. My grandmother's wedding day, my mother's marriage, my own vows. Reduced to $8,000 Sloane was planning to liquidate like any other asset." "She was going to sell them," I whispered. "She was going to sell everything," Grant said. "Your house, your furniture, your jewelry." She had it all itemized. "I'm not just an investment to her, Mom. You're not just an obstacle. We're both just assets on a balance sheet, resources to be extracted and liquidated." His voice broke. His face crumpled. And then my 34-year-old son, my brilliant, kind, successful son who'd built a life and a business and a future, broke down crying on my couch. "I loved her," he sobbed. "I loved her so much. How did I not see this? How could I be that blind?" I pulled him against me the way I'd done when he was small, when his father died and the world didn't make sense anymore. Held him while he grieved not for a real person, but for the illusion of one. For the woman he'd thought he'd married, who'd never actually existed. "You saw what she wanted you to see," I said quietly. "That's what con artists do, honey. They show you what you want to believe and hide everything else." "You saw through her," Grant said. "Why couldn't I?" "Because you loved her. Love makes us want to believe the best in people. It's not a weakness, Grant. It's who you are." We sat like that for a long time, mother and son, united in painful truth. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and dark. Inside, 3 generations of family recipes sat in their wooden box on my kitchen table. Recipes that would never be sold or appraised or reduced to dollar signs on a spreadsheet. Grant finally pulled away, wiping his eyes. "What do I do now? What do you want to do?" "I want to confront her. I want answers. I want to understand how someone could fake love that convincingly." He paused. "And then I want a divorce." I held my son while he grieved a woman who never existed. Held him through the worst heartbreak of his life. Worse than his father's death, because at least that loss was honest. This was betrayal dressed up as love. Greed masquerading as devotion. But he was here. He believed me. He saw the truth. And now, together, we could decide what came next. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired, but I felt clean. Grant and I planned the confrontation with the precision of architects drafting blueprints. No screaming, no drama, no emotional outburst that Sloane could twist into evidence of instability or manipulation. Just facts, delivered calmly, with no room for her to wiggle free. "Sunday dinner," Grant said. "One more Sunday dinner at your house. I'll invite her like normal. She won't suspect anything." "Are you sure you want to do this here?" I asked. "In my home?" "Where else?" Grant's jaw was set in a way that reminded me of his father. This is where she whispered that poison to you. This is where she pretended to love your cooking while planning to sell your legacy. It's fitting." So we waited. 1 week. 7 days of Grant maintaining the illusion of normalcy while investigating further, documenting more, building an airtight case. 7 days of Sloane believing she'd gotten away with everything. Sunday arrived like any other. I set the table the way I always did. My grandmother's plates, my mother's silverware, 3 generations of family meals. But this time, I wasn't cooking. Grant arrived early, alone, carrying grocery bags. "I'm making dinner tonight," he said. "Your recipe. I need you to walk me through it." So I stood beside my son in my kitchen and taught him how to make my famous chicken casserole. Showed him how to season by instinct rather than measurement, how to know when the roux is exactly right, how to layer the ingredients so every bite carries the full story. He worked with the focused precision he usually reserved for architectural drawings, and I realized he wasn't just cooking dinner, he was reclaiming something Sloane had tried to contaminate. "She tried to make this worthless," Grant said quietly as he slid the casserole into the oven. "Like it was nothing. Like you were nothing." "I know. It's not nothing, Mom. This matters. Family matters. Legacy matters. She just couldn't see value in anything she couldn't sell." Sloane arrived at 6:20, late as always. She breezed through the door already complaining about traffic that didn't exist, already checking her phone before her coat was off. She wore the pearl earrings. Of course she did. "Sorry I'm late," she said automatically, kissing Grant's cheek. She glanced at me with that practiced smile. "Hi, Vivian. Something smells good." "Grant cooked tonight," I said evenly. Sloane's eyebrows rose. "Really? That's sweet." The word dripped with condescension, like a grown man cooking for his mother was somehow pathetic rather than loving. We sat down to dinner. Grant served the casserole himself, plating it carefully, setting dishes in front of each of us with deliberate ceremony. Sloane took a bite, made an appreciative sound that I now recognized as performance. "This is actually really good, babe," she said to Grant. "Maybe better than—" She caught herself, glanced at me. "Really good." We ate in relative silence for several minutes. Normal dinner sounds, forks on plates, ice in glasses, the ticking of my kitchen clock. Sloane checked her phone twice. Grant watched her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then, mid-bite, Grant set down his fork and said in a conversational tone, "Sloane, what did you say to my mother in the kitchen 3 weeks ago?" The change in her was instantaneous. Her face paled, her hand froze halfway to her mouth. The mask slipped just enough for me to see panic flash across her features before she recovered. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "Classic deflection. We've had lots of conversations in the kitchen." 3 weeks ago, Grant repeated. "Sunday dinner, you offered to help clear dishes. You followed my mother into the kitchen. What did you say to her?" Sloane's eyes darted between us, calculating, assessing. "I don't remember. We probably just chatted about—" "You told her," Grant interrupted, his voice still calm but harder now, "that her casserole tastes like dog food. Just like she looks." The silence that followed was absolute. Sloane's face went from pale to gray. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked at me with something that might have been hatred or might have been fear. "That's not— I never— Vivian, did you tell him I said that?" Her voice rose, shifted into outrage. "Because I absolutely did not. I would never—" Grant reached beside his chair and pulled out a manila folder. He opened it with the careful precision of someone who'd done this before, who'd learned from his mother how to present evidence. One by one, he placed documents on the table between the dinner plates and the casserole dish. Screenshots, the breakup text, the cruel voicemails. Sloane's old Instagram posts, the captions about expensive taste and not settling. Her browser history, printed and highlighted, how to convince elderly parent to sign over property. The estate settlement spreadsheet with my death mapped out in columns and formulas. The appraisal receipt for my grandmother's pearl earrings. "I know everything," Grant said quietly. Trent Sullivan sends his regards, by the way. So does Cleo. So does my mother's attorney, who's been documenting your financial interest in my family's assets for weeks now." Sloane stared at the papers like they were evidence at a crime scene. Which, in a way, they were. Then she pivoted. She always was good at pivoting. Tears sprang to her eyes with impressive speed. "Grant, please. This is your mother manipulating you. She's never liked me. She's been trying to turn you against me since we got married." She reached for his hand across the table. He pulled away. "She's jealous of our relationship. She can't stand that you have someone else in your life." "Stop," Grant said. "These screenshots could be faked. The browser history could be planted." "She's a paralegal, Grant. She knows how to manufacture evidence." "Stop," Grant repeated, louder this time. "I checked your laptop myself. Your email, your bank accounts. The spreadsheet mapping out my mother's death is in your handwriting, Sloane. Your actual handwriting. The appraisal company confirmed you brought in the earrings. Trent Sullivan has voicemails with your voice on them. This isn't manufactured. This is who you are." Sloane's tears dried up instantly. The mask fell away completely, and what remained was something cold and calculating. "Fine," she said, her voice flat. "So I did my research before marrying you. So I asked questions about finances. That's called being smart, Grant. That's called protecting my future." "That's called being a con artist," Grant said. "And it's over." He stood up, and I'd never been more proud of my son than in that moment. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and placed it on top of the other evidence. "I want a divorce. My attorney filed papers Friday afternoon. You're being served tomorrow morning, but I wanted you to hear it from me first." His voice didn't waver. "The prenup you mocked when we got married, it's ironclad. You get nothing. No house, no savings, no business equity, nothing. You leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage." "You can't do this," Sloane said, standing now too, her voice rising. "We've built a life together. I'm entitled." "You're entitled to nothing," Grant interrupted. "And you need to leave. Now, pack your things tonight. I want you out of the house by morning." Sloane looked at me then, and the hatred in her eyes was pure and undisguised. "This is your fault, you bitter old—" "Enough," Grant said sharply. "Leave, now." She left, grabbed her purse, her phone, her coat. Walked out of my house still wearing my grandmother's pearl earrings, though Grant would get those back through the divorce proceedings. When the door slammed, the silence felt different. Not empty, clean. Grant sat back down, staring at the casserole he'd made with such care. "I didn't feel triumph," he said quietly, echoing my own thoughts. "I just feel tired." "I know," I said. "But you did the right thing." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. "I married her, Mom. I brought her into our family. This is my fault." "No," I said firmly. "She's responsible for her own choices. You loved honestly. She didn't. That's not your failure." My son nodded slowly, and I could see him beginning the long process of healing. We sat together in my kitchen, the casserole growing cold between us. But we were together. We were honest. We were free. And that was enough. Revenge isn't always fire. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to be diminished. Sometimes it's just surviving better than they expected. 3 months after the divorce papers were signed, I stood in my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon and realized I was humming. Not thinking about Sloane, not worrying about Grant, not replaying that whispered insult in an endless loop. Just humming an old song while I chopped vegetables, sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten could feel warm. Sloane was gone. Legally, completely, irrevocably gone. The prenup she'd mocked during their engagement, calling it unromantic and unnecessary, had turned out to be ironclad. She'd walked away with nothing except the expensive wardrobe she'd accumulated and a reputation that preceded her everywhere she went. Trent Sullivan had made sure of that, posting his story on social media after the divorce was finalized. Not for revenge, he said, but as a warning to the next mark. Grant was healing. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. He'd started therapy the week after the confrontation, chose a therapist who specialized in manipulation and emotional abuse. He'd reconnected with friends Sloane had gradually isolated him from, college buddies she'd deemed immature, work colleagues she'd found boring, anyone who might have seen through her performance. Some nights he still called me late, voice thick with confusion and grief. How did I miss it, Mom? How was I that blind? And I'd tell him what his therapist probably already had. Love isn't blindness, it's trust, and trust can be weaponized by people who know how to use it. But he was rebuilding. I watched him remember how to laugh without looking over his shoulder for approval. Watched him make decisions based on what he wanted rather than what would keep the peace. Watched him become himself again. The son I'd raised before Sloan had started editing him into someone more manageable. The cost of being right was watching him hurt. That would always be the price. Seeing my son's pain and knowing I'd been the one to force him to face it, some nights I still wondered if I should have stayed silent, let him figure it out on his own timeline, protected him from the truth a little longer. But then I'd remember the spreadsheet, my death, mapped out in columns and formulas, and I'd know I'd made the only choice a mother could make. Mom? Grant's voice from the hallway pulled me from my thoughts. Bridget's here, and I brought Cleo. Sunday dinner had continued, but it looked different now. Lighter. Bridget had started joining us regularly, her sharp wit and unwavering loyalty a reminder that family isn't always blood. And Cleo, Grant had asked if she could come, if we could expand the tradition to include people who'd chosen to be family rather than been obligated. The more the merrier, I'd said, and meant it. We gathered around the same table where the confrontation had happened, but the energy was entirely different. Bridget brought wine and stories about her former students. Cleo brought homemade bread and updates on the firm's latest projects. Grant brought laughter, real laughter, the kind that came from his chest instead of being performed for someone else's benefit. The casserole sat in the center of the table, golden and fragrant and perfect. Grant had insisted on helping me make it this time, and I'd let him. We were building new traditions on top of the old ones, reclaiming what Sloan had tried to poison. After dinner, while Bridget and Cleo were arguing good-naturedly about some architectural theory I didn't understand, I found Grant in my kitchen, staring at the wooden recipe box on the counter. Remember when Sloan knocked this over? He asked quietly. When all the cards scattered? I remember. I think about that a lot. How she just walked away, didn't even say sorry. He picked up one of the cards, my grandmother's pot roast, the ink faded but the love still visible in every loop of cursive. These meant nothing to her. Your history, your family, your work, it was all just clutter to her. I know. I want to do something with them, Grant said suddenly. Something that honors what they actually are. Not just recipes, stories, legacy, proof that women in our family survive. That's how the book started. Grant's idea, my execution, both of us working together to compile 3 generations of recipe cards into something permanent. We photographed each one, preserving the handwriting, the stains, the notes in margins. We wrote stories to accompany them, my grandmother's Depression-era resourcefulness, my mother's adaptations, my own additions and innovations. We called it Recipes for Resilience, what my mother taught me. Grant insisted on writing the foreword. When he showed me the draft, I cried for the first time since the divorce was finalized. My mother taught me that strength doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like an email sent at 11:47 p.m. because you love your child more than you fear losing them. She taught me that family recipes aren't just about food. They're about women who survived wars, depressions, losses that would have broken lesser people. They're about the quiet work of feeding a family, the invisible labor of keeping traditions alive, the unglamorous act of showing up week after week even when you're not appreciated. And she taught me that sometimes the people who love you have to hurt you to save you, that real love isn't always comfortable, that a mother's job is to protect, even when protection means breaking your heart. These recipes are my inheritance, not money, not property, not assets on a spreadsheet. These cards, this knowledge, this resilience, that's what matters. That's what lasts. Thank you, Mom, for being brave enough to tell me the truth. The book was printed privately, just enough copies for family and close friends, but it sat on my kitchen counter now, proof that Sloane's cruelty hadn't erased anything, had in fact created something stronger. I picked up one of the old recipe cards, the chicken casserole, my grandmother's handwriting crossed with my mother's notes and my own additions, the thing Sloane had mocked, the thing that had become a weapon, then a symbol, then a bridge back to normalcy. My doorbell rang, more friends arriving, the house filling with voices and laughter and the chaotic warmth of chosen family. Grant was in the living room, arguing about something with Cleo, sounding more like himself than he had in 2 years. Bridget was opening another bottle of wine in my kitchen, completely at home. And I stood there holding a recipe card that had survived 3 generations of women, thinking about Sloane's words that night. Your casserole tastes like dog food, just like you look. She'd thought she could erase me with cruelty, thought she could reduce me to an obstacle, a burden, something to be endured until I could be liquidated. She'd underestimated the strength in silence, the power in patience, the danger in a mother who'd learned to document everything. She'd forgotten that I'd survived burying my husband, raising a son alone, building a career in a field that didn't respect women. She'd forgotten that women who survive don't break, they adapt, they plan, they wait for the right moment. And when that moment comes, they don't burn everything down. They simply tell the truth and let the fire start itself. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my son free. I wanted my dignity intact. I wanted my legacy protected. And I got all 3, not through cruelty but through precision, not through rage but through receipts. The casserole still tastes damn good, by the way. Grant made it from scratch last week without my help, and it was perfect. The recipe lives on. The tradition continues. The family, smaller now but stronger, gathers every Sunday. And me? I've never looked better. I'm 58 years old. I survived a con artist who tried to turn my death into a profit margin. I saved my son from a woman who saw him as a retirement plan. I turned scattered recipe cards into a book about resilience. I didn't need Sloane to apologize. I didn't need her to understand what she'd done wrong. I just needed her gone. And I needed Grant safe. And I needed to prove to myself that silence isn't always surrender. If you love this video, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification.